You're listening to Hawk Talk, the official podcast of Hettinger Public School, where we cover school news, school board meeting reviews, guest speaker interviews, and much more. Here at Hettinger Public School, we challenge all to meet their academic and life goals while inspiring lifelong learning. We are a district that values trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. Now, let's go to today's episode. Hey everybody, thank you very much for tuning in today. I have the great honor of sitting with here Stacy Schaffer of Bismarck of Project 318, I believe is how you put it across, right?
Pretty close. 318 project.
close.
You were close though.
Okay, gotcha. So for those who don't know that as well as you, if you want to give a little bit of background on what that is.
Yeah, for sure. So we are an organization, yes, we're based out of Bismarck, but we are statewide. And we're an organization that focuses on spreading educational awareness on topics like human trafficking, sexual exploitation, as well as social media safety. And then we also have something called our Bravery Backpack Program, where we work with ages 2 to 17, and then a survivor mentorship program where we directly work with adult survivors of human trafficking.
Okay, and then you guys serve, like, what is your guys' kind of region or area? Where are you guys really all involved in?
So we spend most of our time on the western side of the state.
Okay, gotcha. So pretty much anywhere west of the river, essentially.
Yes.
Gotcha. Awesome. So you were here today working with our students doing two different presentations, one early this morning and a little bit later this morning. What were some of the things that you talked about?
Yeah, for sure. So we had the opportunity to dive into what do we mean by this topic of human trafficking, but then we also got to look at what is social media? How do we use it safely? How do we protect ourselves as well as our friends and family?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and speaking of social media, you know, we just had our most recent podcast with Mark Lineweaver, and he's kind of talking about similar thing. It's starting to become a real hot topic for a lot of solutions and problems that are happening in society. So it's really great that you're here and helping educate the kids along their social media journey that they will be going across. So thank you very much for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, social media can definitely be used for so many positivities, like whether it's having a certain platform that you get to champion or even the opportunity to meet other people. But it also has that dangerous side too that we need to be aware of.
Yep, absolutely. And those were some of the things that you talked about with the kids, kind of talking how they can use social media to their advantage. Some people can, and for a negative use. Why don't you kind of talk a little bit about that and share with some of the things that you shared with the kids?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So we talked about the things that we post. For example, if I put myself out there where I share things like maybe I'm mad at my parents or I'm not getting along with my friends and I post those things, that puts me in a vulnerable situation. And if I'm a perpetrator or a predator in some capacity, I definitely am going to target you because of those things, or just simply posting certain images or sharing sexually explicit photos, how those things could have a lifetime of problems for us. And we often don't think about that today. We don't think of what could happen 4 years from now if I post or share this.
Yes, absolutely. And, and that's such a great message for the young kiddos, because they are so much, their perspective is very much just now, today, or maybe even the next couple of weeks. But as they get older, that's really going to come into play. So it's a good message to have. What were some of the other things that you kind of shared with the students side of the social media? Because if I'm correct, you talked about human trafficking as well, and maybe you want to touch a little bit on that.
Yes, for sure. So a lot of times we have misconceptions of what human trafficking looks like. In fact, we often think it's a problem that exists in other countries, but not a problem that exists in the United States, let alone in rural North Dakota. So we really talked about what do we mean by this term human trafficking, which at its basic level is selling someone for a good or service. So we explored that. What industries does it exist in, but also why in a rural community could we potentially be a target? So just looking at, how does this happen? But again, how can we protect ourselves?
Absolutely. And, kind of doubling down on that, how can we be a target, as a rural community? Maybe you want to go a little bit deeper on that, like why a rural community is also at risk.
Yes, for sure. So what's unique about North Dakota is we're geographically large, but we don't have the highest population. So it does make it more difficult for law enforcement to adequately patrol the state. So you have that. Also, we border other states as well as another country. And anytime you have major highways that you are near, that again puts you at risk for additional criminal activity like human trafficking to occur. The other thing with our rural communities is, unfortunately, we don't always realize some of the things happening in the world, and it puts us in a state where we can be more naive, and because of that, more easily taken advantage of. And again, predators and people like human traffickers, they search for that, for people with vulnerabilities.
Yep. Yeah, that makes total sense. So when you're living in a small community, you naturally have, like you said, that sense of naivety of, where that thing's not going to happen to us here. That doesn't happen here. Yes. But on the contrary, that's why it happens here.
Yes, exactly. Because we tend to be very trusting. I grew up in a small town in North Dakota on a farm.
Oh, okay.
So I'm originally from Wishick, North Dakota.
Okay.
Yes. And like I said, grew up on a farm, and I was not aware of a lot of these things until I got to college, and then realized, okay, the world's a little bit different than what I thought.
Gotcha. Wow, that's awesome. So, when we're talking about, the rural community, being taken advantage of, we were explaining that to the kiddos. You were explaining that to the kiddos. What were some of the tools that you were giving them to, be aware of those things, also be aware of just general, sex trafficking or child trafficking or anything like that? What were some of the tools that you gave them?
So the first thing we looked at is, what do we mean by the phrase vulnerability? And what do we mean when we say taking advantage of? So all of us have vulnerabilities, right? It doesn't matter who you are. So in essence, we're all susceptible to human trafficking, but there are certain risk factors that make us more vulnerable than other risk factors. So again, like sharing, depending what I post online, that can be a big thing. If I'm sending sexually explicit photos or images, that can be used as blackmail against me. So again, just being really cautious and recognizing that human trafficking, 50% of it happens from people we know. So again, that misconception that it's that person driving a white van wearing a hoodie that's going to, snatch me off the street. It's not
actually that.
It's not that at all. It's a lot of times it's 3 out of 4 victims are recruited online. So that online presence is going to be the biggest component to this. But again, oftentimes it's by people we know in some capacity.
Wow. So that's what makes it even a little bit more dangerous and a little more tricky to identify. On that topic, one of the things that you shared with the students was some of the new tactics that we're seeing for advertising. Do you want to kind of dive deep into that a little bit?
Yep. So on the internet, especially if we are using Instagram, TikTok, or a plethora of other apps that are out there, oftentimes predators create fake accounts. In fact, there's one trafficker that we worked with who had created 50 different fake accounts, posing as different people as well as different businesses. So oftentimes we'll see like fake modeling agencies reach out to, whether it's young girls, young boys, saying, I love what you post. You're really beautiful. I have a job for you. If you can get out here to California, Florida, New York, wherever the case may be, we'll have a job for you. But come to find out, it's actually not a modeling agency. It's a trafficker hiding behind this photo, pretending to be someone that they're not. So just really getting the students to understand that somebody might claim to be something or someone, but you need to actually do your research to see, are they legitimate or is this another fake account?
Absolutely. So, and to kind of go a little bit deeper, some of the places we're seeing that on are places like Instagram. So like for example, a teenager is going to be getting messages on Instagram from these entities trying to appear as if they're an official entity or an official business or this or that.
Yep.
But like you said in the presentation, very often by doing your research, such as viewing that entity's profile, it kind of gives it away a little bit if you pay close attention.
Yes, for sure. And just to give a quick case example of something that we had a middle schooler who was befriended by somebody much older on Instagram. And by that, I mean, it was somebody in their early 20s. And when you have a 13, 14-year-old that's all of a sudden dating somebody in their early 20s, there's a lot of issues and red flags that go up with that. But while she was dating this person, all of a sudden she started to receive these messages from modeling agencies saying, we think you're beautiful. Again, we have a job for you if you can get here. So she showed him to her boyfriend and said, do you think these are legitimate? And he said, yeah, I do. And in fact, I'd be willing to drive you there. So they decided one day after school, he'd pick her up. He picked her up. She was reported missing by her parents. Highway Patrol picked him up in South Dakota, and we found out that this guy, her boyfriend, was actually a trafficker who had created several fake accounts on Instagram pretending to be modeling agencies. So he literally would recruit these girls, date them, right? Quotation marks, so date them, but then use these modeling agencies, fake modeling agencies, to convince them for him to take them out of the state.
Wow. Which is great evidence of it's sometimes the people that you know. And
yes. And in fact, unfortunately, like I shared with the students right now, the number one type of trafficking we're seeing is familial trafficking, where it's a family member that's the trafficker. So it's not always, again, like the stranger danger. It can literally be people that we're close to or love.
And with that, you kind of talked about, okay, so if that's the situation, why is it so hard for them to just leave? That was one of the things that you talked about was, why don't they just leave?
Yes. And we get asked that all the time. Like, why don't they just walk away? And on average, it takes a survivor 10 to 12 times before they're really able to leave their situation. And part of it is just getting up the courage to be able to do so. So we talked a lot about what we mean about trauma bonding or Stockholm syndrome. So basically rewiring a person's brain to believe that I can't live without this person. So traffickers are able to do that. There's blackmail involved, or a lot of fear and shame that goes with this. So it's not as easy. So it's already complicated if the trafficker is not a family member, but then add to the fact that it might be a family member, why that could be challenging to get out of these situations.
Yeah, making it really, really complicated.
Absolutely.
Wow. So also, too, one of the things you talked about were things that you can do, things that you can help with. Maybe you want to go over that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So we really want to encourage people to continue to educate themselves about the topic. There's so much information, as well as learning. Like, you can start this at a young age. I know we didn't necessarily talk about this with students, but, for parents, there's so many great resources out there on things like NetSmarts. Our website has a lot of good things, but also there's books out there called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, where just having a conversation with kids, at the age of 6, of just like, what's a good image versus what's a bad image, especially if they're going to be using the internet. Because what we're finding is there's a stat that just came out that parents will spend 43 minutes in a child's lifetime talking about the internet. Only 43 minutes. So just think of all the topics we might talk to kids about, but yet parents will spend less than an hour in a child's lifetime talking about social media safety, but yet we'll give a 3-year-old a tablet.
And then the amount of hours that they actually spend on that. And, obviously, as you're growing up, you're experiencing all that, and you're just taking it at face value. You don't know any different. So you don't have that guidance. You don't have that, wow, what a statistic.
Right. So, just really encouraging students to be aware of their surroundings. If something in their gut seems wrong, it's probably wrong. And then on a social media basis, if somebody makes you feel uncomfortable, block them. You don't owe them anything. You do not have to continue that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So to kind of dial back a little bit, we talked a little bit about your background a little bit. So how did you get into this role with this group? Kind of explain how you got to that point a little
for
bit.
sure. So in 2006, I was an undergrad at the University of Mary, and I had a professor say, if you go to this guest speaker, you can get extra credit. And I loved extra credit.
Yeah.
So I went to this guest speaker, and he was talking about something called human trafficking. like I said, also known as modern day slavery. So I felt compelled to want to do something. So I asked my parents if I could go to Guatemala.
Wow. Okay.
So went over to Guatemala, and that's where I experienced my first case of human trafficking with a little girl named Anna. She was 8 years old at the time, and she was trafficked from El Salvador to a brothel in Guatemala, where unfortunately she was repeatedly sexually abused. And we had gotten a tip, then we're able to intervene and provide her with services. So she was my inspiration and motivation for starting 31-8 Project. Fast forward to 2015. So 2015 was the year that we launched.
Okay. So, and when you mean by we, I'm assuming you and who else?
Yeah. So I guess it was me who started.
Oh, okay.
Yes. But we do have a pretty good team.
Okay.
We now have 11 different board members, and
Oh, wow.
we have 3 employees as well as contracted employees. So
Wow.
we've really been able to expand over the past couple of years. But it was definitely a journey. I've always been involved in the anti-human trafficking movement. I did try to walk away a couple of times because it is a pretty dark field.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Yeah, so I had to learn a lot about self-care, secondary trauma, all of those fun things.
Okay.
And I'm definitely in a much better spot with it and understand how to set better boundaries. So it's been quite a journey, but I've loved being able to be in this sector.
Wow. So then, if you could simply explain the services that you guys provide, maybe you could do that really quick for our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. So yes, that education piece is big to us. But with our survivor mentorship program, what happens is when a survivor gets referred to us, they're paired with a mentor. And that mentor works with them at minimum 1 year. They can work longer, but it's to help them achieve certain life goals. So we've had anything from I want to go to college, I want to get my GED, I want to start a catering business, to because of my trauma, going to the grocery store is too scary for me. Will my mentor come with me? So we walk alongside with them, and we're just starting to launch a support group for survivors that will be happening this summer as well. But the survivors we work with are located throughout the state of North Dakota. So it's not just in one area. So our mentors do meet with them in person quarterly, but most of it is done through Zoom or just the phone.
Wow. That's phenomenal. So if people want to find more resources about you guys, where do they go? What can they do?
Yeah, so you can definitely visit our website at 318project.org or check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter. I think we even have LinkedIn. So you can definitely see what we're doing that way. Also, you could subscribe to our newsletter. We send out one a month, and it just shares updates as well as one educational article about human trafficking.
Okay. Wow. So you guys have quite a bit of content and quite a bit of resources available out there to learn more.
Yes,
that's
for sure.
Fantastic. Okay. So before we wrap up, is there anything else additional that you want to share maybe with our listeners to kind of help educate them a little bit more about these things that are in our environment and that we may not be thinking about often?
Yeah, I want to encourage listeners that truly, if you see something that seems strange, I want to encourage you to either report that to law enforcement, or there's a tip line in North Dakota that's operated by the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. You can report those tips without even giving your name. So I want to encourage you to do that. There's also the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And the reason I say this is 1/3 of our cases are reported by the general public. So the general public is truly the eyes and ears of the community. So just want to encourage you that, if you see something that's strange, there's no harm in reporting it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you very, very much today for coming in and talking with us and sharing your information and all your resources here for our community.
Yes, thank you. It was great to be here.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you very much for tuning in to Hawk Talk. Remember, you could listen to our podcast anywhere you listen to your podcast, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcast, any of those, and have a great day.